Hi, this is Kelly. You're listening to the 11th episode of the Two Broads Talking Politics Vote Her In series, a collaboration with author Rebecca Sive. In this series, we look at the movement to elect our first woman president. Our guest today is the senior senator from Minnesota and Democratic presidential candidate Amy Klobuchar. You can catch all of the episodes in this series at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com/voteherin or in our regular feed anywhere podcasts are found. Hi, everyone. This is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and I am here as part of our Vote Her In segment with my partner on this segment, Rebecca Sive. Hi, Rebecca.
Good afternoon.
And we are joined today by a special guest, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Well, thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Rebecca. It's kind of fun. I think the last podcast I did was Pod Save America and Love It or Leave It. And now the next one is you guys. So it's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, it's very special for you to be here, and thank you for doing it with us. And thank you for accepting our invitation. We really wanted to focus both on the broad issues that you might want to talk about, but specifically on some of the women's issues. And we were talking earlier about the debate, starting with your wonderful comment at the debate when Governor Inslee spoke and you rebutted him and talked about these three powerful women, beginning with yourself, pro-choice advocates. So I thought if you could just start out by sharing with us your views on, as we look ahead on the matter of reproductive justice, how you see that and how we can work with you and other leaders on that.
Well, I think my point there was, he was talking about how he was one of the only one that did this and did that. And we had this historic moment where we literally doubled in one night the number of women who had ever participated in a primary presidential debate on the Democratic side. Because before that, there were only three, Hillary being one of them.
Right.
And then here we had three in one night. And then, of course, tripling it the next night. So, and I wanted to make that point. And this is a man's issue and a woman's issue. There's no doubt about it. But what we are seeing, I don't think anyone ever imagined with these restrictive laws that have actually been passed in legislatures and signed into law by governors in states like Alabama and Georgia and several others. The Alabama one goes so far as to put a 99-year penalty on any doctor who performs abortion. Not 99-year lose your license, 99-year go to prison. And this is just not even close to being in the mainstream. 77% of Americans think that we should not overturn Roe v. Wade. And I think it's really important to reach citizens on this issue in a way that is sort of jars people to realize this isn't just a threat. This is actually happening right now. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is to remind them that, ironically, the number of abortions has gone down in this country, and that's good. And it went down during the Obama administration quite significantly. Why? Because we were funding places like Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood itself, 1 in 5 women get their health care there sometime in their lifetime. And we were funding contraception and advice and things like that. And so now this administration, while putting these supporting this effort to pass laws like this, is also taking away the funding for clinics like Planned Parenthood. And so that's why it is so important for the people of this country to understand how extreme they're being and also what we can do to fix it. First, most obvious, elect a new president who doesn't share those views. And I always like to say, may the best woman win. Yes. Secondly, it is making sure that, which we can do literally in the first 100 days, to stopping this domestic and international gag rules, and also funding places like Planned Parenthood. And all of this can be, these Trump policies can be reversed in the first 100 days without a law. And then the third thing, which you do need a law for, so you probably can't get it done in 100 days, although it depends on what the makeup of the Congress is, which is to codify Roe v. Wade. Because while we hope the Supreme Court won't do the wrong thing, you just never know. They may turn their back on years and years of precedent.
Right, right. Well, one of the things, obviously, that you alluded to is that, women have become much more active and much more vocal, and we can't win this fight or any of the other fights without significant local activity, including in red states and red counties. And I know Kelly had a question about that she wanted to ask you.
Yeah, so I've heard you speak before about how you've won in a lot of places throughout Minnesota that the Democrats don't always win, places that Trump won. So I'm wondering if you could talk some about sort of the key to that. How are you able to win in those red districts, in those rural districts, and how do we then take that, what's the message we should be giving all over the country for Democrats to be able to win in these districts?
Right. Well, the first thing is to go there. And I think a lot of times people realize if you are only in big cities and that you aren't getting out in rural areas. And my whole time in the Senate, I visited all my counties every year, all 87 of them, the reddest of red, and met with Democrats, Republicans, and independents, talked about issues, bread and butter issues that matter to them. That's why I'm on the Agriculture Committee. And I've worked successfully on farm bills, which is important, not just to rural, but also to urban, since our food doesn't magically show up on our tables, making the case for them that it's not one size fits all when it comes to healthcare and education and housing and issues that you'd be surprised that they really do share with urban areas. It's just some of the different challenges they have. And then it is standing up for them, and they don't always agree. The residents in the rural areas may not agree with everything I say, but they know that I respect them. And politically, this is making sure that it's part of your campaign strategy to go not just where it's comfortable, but where it's uncomfortable, to make the case for rural America. And there's not that many of us that are talking about this right now on the national stage for the presidential campaign, and I'm going to continue to do that.
One of the things, Kelly and I were lucky enough, for those of you listening, to hear Amy speak this morning at Operation Push in Chicago. It was pretty inspiring and terrific. And one of the things you mentioned there was one of your predecessors in Minnesota, Paul Wellstone, who, I don't think you know this, was my college advisor.
I think I might have heard it once. That's an incredible thing.
But, he inspired so many people. And I thought if you could just talk for a minute about what you learned from him about going out to different parts of the state and going elsewhere in the country.
I remember, I had talked about it in part because he had worked with Reverend Jackson a lot. And that was a Chicago, Minnesota connection outside of the Bears and the Vikings always having these brutal fights and other things. But I had... Also, the Paul Wellstone was someone that took on the farm crisis back when we had freedom to farm and went to these rural areas and got people going. And he was a firebrand liberal, there's no doubt about it, but it was all for good. It was all about having people's backs. And he would always say that he was going to stand up for the little fellers and not the Rockefellers, and that he was about improving people's lives. And so what I most remember about Paul was his last few years of his life were before he died tragically too soon with his wife Sheila in that plane crash, was that he really taught me a lot about grassroots campaigning. He would teach me how to get on city buses to campaign, and we would go down blocks and blocks, shake hands, and then we go, thanks everyone, like we were getting off, and then we'd get on a bus going the exact opposite way, and we would just keep going around and around and getting on the buses, always paying the fares. But then the other thing, which involves a different bus, which was his green bus, that was his signature, a part of his campaign, is that he always used to run back and forth around that bus in parades and shake everyone's hands. And the last year of his life, he'd announced that he had MS. He was in a lot of pain. And he would just stand on the back of the bus and wave with his wife, Sheila. And what was amazing was that they had energized so many people in these green shirts to run around that bus that you didn't even notice he wasn't running himself. And that's politics at its best, because you are expanding your group of people that are with you. You are passing on a torch to others, which is what he ultimately did when he died. And of course, not knowing he was going to die, but he had created so much excitement for politics. And one personal note is that he had been a leader when it came to mental health care. Right. And that has been one of my signature issues in this presidential campaign. And for him, different than me, I have addiction in my family with my dad, who was an alcoholic and has since gotten through that because of, in his words, he was pursued by grace. But Paul's brother was schizophrenic, and as he described it, the house was always dark because there was so much stigma and they didn't want to talk about it. And in fact, Paul fought for this mental health parity to make sure that mental health illnesses get insurance coverage just like physical illnesses, and ended up getting that passed only after he died, that we got it passed. And so that's part of this, my work right now, is getting that implemented so it really applies to everyone, even though we've got the law in the books. And then also making sure there's enough mental health beds. Iowa, 64 beds, public mental health beds for the entire state. Suicide in this country up 30% in 15 years. So when you hear these stories, they're not just stories. A lot of suicides with LGBTQ youth, a lot of suicides with farmers and veterans and groups that had not seen this high level of suicide before. And so it is putting the money into it. I have a way to pay for it with opioid manufacturers that could go toward addiction as well as mental health. But that is something where Paul had led. And I know somewhere he's up there, smiling because it's not been, I don't think that any presidential campaign has taken an on candidate in a big way.
I was just thinking about Paul as you talked and remembering we were students, but he pushed us too to do the right thing and to work hard and be a part of the change. And speaking of change, I know that you put forth your first 100 days plan. It's a lot to get through, but boy, there's a lot of good stuff there. And I know Kelly wanted to ask you a question about that.
Yeah, so in preparing for this, I read through a lot of the first 100 days plan, which I think is great. And, a lot of our listeners, like me, are mothers, mothers of especially young children around the country. And so I'd love if you could talk some about the ways that the plan for the first 100 days, especially the things you want to do for families, for mothers, for kids, and for women generally.
Of course. And yes, you can see the plan at amyklobuchar.com. But it has over 100 things on it. About a little over 100 of them can actually be done without Congress in the first 100 days. And then there's a couple dozen others that are more introducing legislation and getting that rolling, which will probably take the year to get it done, but you can at least put the marker out there to introduce it. And when it comes to being a mom, that's actually how I got involved in politics, because our daughter was sick and I got kicked out of the hospital in 24 hours back then, and she was in intensive care. And so I went to the legislature and got one of the first laws passed guaranteeing new moms and their babies a 48-hour hospital stay. And so one of the things that's in this policy actually is better maternity care standards, just because we're seeing much higher than they should be deaths, especially in African-American community, people of color in maternity wards. There was a notorious case in New Orleans where this mom-to-be goes into the maternity ward and says, "Oh, my hands are swollen," and doctor doesn't listen to her, ignores her, and she loses her baby. And you can quickly change some of those standards and put things out there. Also, our getting child care legislation introduced, doing something about farmer prices. There's one thing you can do immediately. Actually, you can order bringing in less expensive drugs from other countries, which will be from safe countries, major incentive for our pharma companies to keep the prices down. So that's something you can do in the first 100 days. And then I would go on from there to get Medicare negotiation for prices, which may not help young moms, but it will, because that is such a big purchaser of drugs that it'll bring the prices down on pharmaceuticals. Gun violence, something that every parent is scared about there. You can actually close something that's called the boyfriend loophole, which is the bill I lead now, and you can do it as president. You don't need Congress to do it. And that is saying that if you have someone who has been convicted of domestic violence, even if it's not just with someone they're married to, which was what the law is now, but in fact a boyfriend or a girlfriend. if you have been convicted of that crime, then you can't get a gun, because that's one of the highest rates of deaths is with people who are in a relationship with someone. If they've been convicted and then they go out and they try to get a gun. And right now there's this huge gap in the law that it only applies to people who are married or used to be married or are living together. So that's one. And then there's also something you can do on stalking, those cases. And then, of course, I go much bigger than that and do universal background checks and other things that we can do, magazines and things that have led to all these mass shootings. And then, of course, on a more positive note, school funding and making it easier for people to afford their student loans and make it easier to afford college. Retirement, maybe not the first thing on young moms' minds or young women's minds.
I'm thinking about it.
There, you've got to keep Social Security strong, but you have to have options besides 401ks. More and more, you've got people in the gig economy that are working 1 or 2 jobs or 3 jobs even. And so I just introduced with Senator Chris Coons of Delaware something called Up Savings Accounts. And it's a novel idea where if you're at a place that doesn't have a 401k, they would save for you, the employer, small employers, 50 cents for every hour. And it would be paid for with incentives from taking back some of those huge corporate tax cuts under the Republican tax bill. So if you do 50 cents an hour, it comes to $600,000 in a lifetime, and you can take it with you wherever you go. It can apply to part-time work, and the best part, the first $2,500 a year you could apply as long as you can show you had emergency expense to take out and use for that, which you can't do with a 401k right now. Right. And that gets to the fact that 4 out of 10 Americans can't afford the $400 for an emergency room visit. Right. So that is a pretty novel plan. It's supported by SEIU and a number of other groups. And so we've got to start thinking ahead to the retirement challenges, which really hit women hard because we live longer. That's exactly a great thing. Right. But it means we have more time to have money for retirement. We also have less money going into retirement because of the pay gap. And income inequality, but also because sometimes women are taking time off, more likely for childcare and for having babies, and then you lose money. So there's all kinds of reasons that it matters more for women than men when it comes to retirement.
So speaking of it matters more, and I know perhaps as a closing, you could talk with us about why women should come together right now to elect a woman president, whatever you want to say about your own candidacy. I'm obviously partial to hearing, but I think that we do have more time and we do have more commitment, and we've proven that since the last election. And so if you would give us a rallying cry to conclude this podcast, that would be wonderful.
Well, the first is that, as you can see from the debates, there are a lot of candidates, but there are only a few women running who've had electoral experience and who've run things. And I think that when you look at what happened in 2018, it was the year of the woman again. Yes. Because the women won all these races. They won in Kansas. The new governor of Kansas, Laura Kelly, beat Chris Kobach, who was a nightmare on voting rights. Wisconsin, you had Tammy Baldwin got reelected, a state that eluded us, before we had women elected in Congress, record number of women of color elected. And it just shows that these women actually took on Republicans and they won. And there is a lot of yearning out there for a woman candidate. And I think that's part of why we get hit all the time, and I think got unfairly hit a bunch of the women candidates on various grounds right when we announced compared to the men. And I think that's actually changed. And it's changed because we keep doing well. We keep doing well in these debates. I remember at one point all of us had a combined total which was less than either of the two front runners. And I think that's changing now. Yes. And I thought that just can't be because we have such qualified women running. So I'd say the first one is an electoral argument. We can win, and we can especially win against Donald Trump. Because if you look at who's really bested him over the last few years, one person comes to mind. That would be Nancy Pelosi. A woman did it with a flick of her sunglasses as she walked out of the White House. And then just secondly, it has been a long time in coming. I was on the Trevor Noah show a year ago or so, and at the time we owned only 50 52 women, I think, in the Senate in the history of the country, compared to 2,000 men. And 26 of them or so are serving there now, the women. But when I gave him that statistic, he said if a nightclub had those numbers, they'd close it down, which is true. So, I think that's the message. Women have showed they can govern, not just by the numbers, but by the impact they've had. And there's been studies of that shown that we're good at bringing people together and getting things done. And then you just have the simple fact is we can win.
Absolutely.
And how do you want people to help out your campaign?
Oh, well, they can go to amyklobuchar.com. Now, we easily made the debate stage for the summer, but to make the fall, we need 130,000 people that are given to our campaign. And we know we'll do it, but we would like to do it without spending a bunch of money to do it, because we want to save our money for January and February with the early states. And so we'd love it. People can just go and sign up and give whatever they can, even $1 matters. And then that helps us to get on the debate stage in the fall.
Excellent.
I want to thank you, Amy, for doing this, for years of friendship, and for the opportunity for us to collaborate on voting her in, right?
Okay, let's get it done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I'll be back when I'm in the White House.
All right.
We'll have you come in.
I will hold you to that.
Yeah, we'll do something. The Oval Office. All right.
The Vote Her In segment is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. Our theme song is called Are You Listening, off of the album Elephant-Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.